Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman, and this is the show where we talk about, well, anything really. But I want to thank you for joining me today for a conversation with David Krae. This is his second time visiting with us and having a conversation, and I'm really excited to talk to him. A lot of people in the audience asked for him to come back, so he's here. If it's your first time at the channel, I hope you will consider subscribing so you can be notified about new content, especially live shows like this one. The goal for this channel is to be a meeting place, sort of town hall of sorts, where we can talk about ideas. Usually I'm talking about how to improve education. We're sharing ideas about that. It's definitely a place where diversity of thought is not only welcome, it is championed. And every so often I have the good fortune to talk to people just about culture because, as you can probably guess, culture is sort of downstream from education and then it circles back and infiltrates education. So it's really important to speak to people from outside the realm of education in places like entertainment and writing and, the production of culture. And David is one of those people I turn to because he's an astute observer of our culture and of our social fabric. He's also a Gen Xer like me, and I love talking to people from my own generation. We're sort of bookends. I'm at the beginning, he's at the end, but we have some shared experiences and we look at things through that Gen X lens. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming David Krae. Hi, David.
Hey, good to see you again.
You too. I'm so glad you're back. People were like, more, please. Like after the last one, like bring him back, please. So
well, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I had to let some time go by so you could be doing some things. You could come back and update us. What's going on?
Well, not a whole. I mean, it's summer, so
yeah,
been trying to get a little bit of outdoor time. But no, I've been working on working on a few secret projects. I guess I like to call them. Not really secret. Okay. Just trying to get caught up on a lot of things. I think I spent a lot during the sort of last 2 years of all this pandemic nonsense. I think I got sidetracked with a lot of politics and right. Sort of put some of my own work to the side a little bit, and so I'm getting back into that, which is nice. Right. More writing. I got a film project, for film related project. Right. Not obviously I'm always pitching film ideas and trying to get scripts off the ground, but and some language stuff too. Which sort of goes to some of the things that we've talked about before. Right. Yeah, exactly. But the big reveals aren't ready yet, but I'll keep you posted.
Definitely do. Please do. For those of you who don't know David has a background in TV, film, and writing. He likes to write historical fiction, right? That's what your specialty is?
Yeah, I've done quite a bit of that. I was a history student for a lot of years.
So you're also one of my favorite people to talk to about popular culture, things that are going on. And one of the things that I've been keeping my eye on is how some of these postmodern / woke ideas have infiltrated our popular culture or been promoted by popular culture. And I titled this particular show, like the Truman Show in real life, because I saw a video this morning about how the Truman Show was sort of like a warning. The maker of the video said it felt like a warning. It felt prophetic about, how people can be persuaded to believe that things are a certain way when they're not, right? Obviously, the show itself kind of being a metaphor for reality. And I thought about that and I thought, like, I wonder, and I started pinching myself how much of what I think is true is true. We're all in that state of doubt now, right? And I started looking around at popular culture today and wondering, is there anything, there's nothing as overt as Truman Show to say, like, watch out, right? But were there any cracks? Were there any fissures? Was I seeing anything come through? And I thought of a couple things, but I'm wondering what you see. Are you still seeing things in the entertainment world or pop culture being predominantly in your face finger wagging, or are you seeing any cracks, any fissures in the
well, I think
in the mindset?
I think there is definitely sort of there are many activists in various parts of our society, different people with different political views, different political goals, different cultural political agendas. And I know that, for instance, in in entertainment, we've seen a lot of artists, creators, actors, directors, producers, executives at studios making comments about various sort of political moments, right? Like, when the Me Too thing happened, everybody had to talk about that. Just recently, obviously, on the other side of the coin, with Salman Rushdie, right? People are commenting on that, saying, look, we have to have freedom of expression, it's a sad and horrific thing that happened to him, and that has happened to him for so many years, that he's been living under this this fatwa. But it's tragic that it had to come to this, that someone attacked him, to maybe wake people up a little bit and say, oh, well, maybe we should be listening to this idea that words, that words are violence is maybe a little problematic, because then if words are violence, you can respond to them with violence, right? Like, some people will take it that far. And so maybe we need to start rethinking some of these recent ideas of these, let's be sensitive about everything, versus let's let people tell their stories, let them be offensive, let them offend in that way, because no one's forcing us to read their books, no one's forcing us to go watch that movie, no one's, you don't have to consume that particular piece of culture if that's not your thing. This idea that we should be policing who gets to write what, who gets to tell what story, who gets to play what character, because I think, what is last week, the Fidel Castro thing with James Franco, right? And he looks like a lot like him now that he's older. And I guess it turns out that Castro's parents were both European anyway, like, so this whole stink was for nothing. But it's this whole policing of culture, and that, and stay in your lane, and you're only allowed to do this, and I'm all for let's have diverse stories, diverse characters. I remember in the the 90s and 2000s, when I was sort of my early days, that was the thing. Let's make sure to be inclusive. Awesome. But now they're saying, well, you can only write about these characters if you're from that community. And I'm like, oh, then nobody can write a story that's inclusive, because they can only write about their own, unless you have like 17 ethnicities in your background.
Right, exactly. Right? It's kind of limiting.
Right? Like, if you're a total mutt, like, which I am, by the way, I got a whole bunch of different ethnic groups that I could draw upon. So all the purists, but
there's a big noise about Joan of Arc now.
Oh, yeah.
Was that like the I Am Joan or whatever?
Well, okay, so I have mixed feelings about that one. Like, I know people are saying, oh, it's the gender community using Joan of Arc to pursue their agenda using the theater arts, and I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, it is to some extent, probably, but at the same time, it's like, have you ever seen like interpretations of Shakespeare where they're like, we're gonna do Shakespeare, but we're gonna set it in modern times in like a gay neighborhood or something, like we're gonna do a read. So if they want to do that interpretation, I'm kind of like, fine, it's their artistic thing. Will it be just a propaganda piece? Maybe. I don't know. I haven't seen it. Or will they tell a good story and work in some of the themes that they wanted and use it as a metaphor for their own struggles as a community? And like, as much as I'm like, I don't like the whole like, don't force your ideology down my throat, like whether it's gender ideology or radical race theory ideology, things like that. At the same time, if people want to explore themes through interpretive art, fine, as long as they're not being propagandists about it, as long as they're just, let's do it. So I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen it. It hasn't.
Yeah.
It's new.
If they're not trying to persuade you that that's how it actually happened, that kind of thing. Like,
yeah,
when you take history, it's something that has some basis in history a little bit, right? And you're trying to do your interpretation as if to say, this is what it really was.
Well, there's some of that on Twitter. Like the Twitterati, they're always like, so-and-so in ancient history, they were part of our community because, and I've seen this with different communities over the years. They're like, they claim anybody awesome as their own. Right? Like, oh, that person's awesome. They were one of us, and I'm like, sure, everybody does it.
Exactly.
But like, and there are people, I've seen people on social media, making claims or saying, oh, well, this person from ancient history, we found this skeleton in the ground. How can we assume their gender? And it's like, yeah. When it gets political, it gets annoying. And I feel the same way about art, film, literature, theater, whatever. It can be political without being propaganda, right? Like if you want to address political issues or set something in a political milieu or explore themes of some political idea or ideology or even a religion, fine, that's all doable, as long as you're not like turning it into a propaganda piece that is you're indoctrinating your audience rather than illuminating something, an idea or a situation. And there's a difference to that, and it goes back to what you were talking about, the Truman Show, right? Like, if we look at it, our world, like, some sort of panopticon, which it's sort of turning into, we'll get to that, but you've seen the movie where Truman is chafing under this surveillance, this scrutiny that he's under, and that he knows they're manipulating him, right? Like,
he figures it out, like, really gradually. And that's what struck me about the video that this person made on YouTube. It was like, that does seem to be what a lot of people are seeing right now. I mean, I've been covering education for a lot longer than I had a YouTube channel in terms of in my own life watching it. And I felt like I was all alone on the island. Like, does anyone else notice that, this is fake or whatever? And now I'm starting to see other people go, I don't think I believe them. They're telling me this is good for my child. And I don't think that's true, but it's like, so they're starting to have that Truman-esque, like, wake up thing. And it's both great and terrifying to watch, because I feel like I can see both sides. So they're Truman, the people I'm working with, the parents I'm working with, I feel like they're Truman. They're just starting to wake up. And I feel almost like I'm the female character in the movie who's like, Truman, it's all fake, run away. But I also I can see the Ed Harris director going, all right, feed him a message of this, tell him this, because I'm seeing the reaction. And I know that it's the propaganda reaction. And I'm also saying, look, they're feeding you fake messages. They're telling you this, they're telling you that, they're telling you your kid's going to commit suicide, blah, blah, blah. So it is super weird to be in that position where you kind of see both sides of that.
There's so much manipulation going on.
Yeah.
And that's what's gross. That's what's really gross about it. It's no one wants, I don't want to say no one, but so many different people, different organizations and groups and ideology want to install their agenda. And they're willing to lie to do it. And that's all right, let's have a debate. Let's review let's see if there's any evidence to back up this particular idea or that particular idea. What's the best approach to these issues, right? And not like nobody's saying these issues don't exist. I mean, whether it's racism or whether it's, issues with trans people, or, and especially young people, right? Who are vulnerable because of their youth, who are still figuring themselves out, some of them quite young. What is the best way to approach that? And instead of having grown-up conversations, reasonable debates, discussions about like, what are the different issues, everyone's like, no, if you dare to question my program, my plan, then you want everybody to die. You're like, it's this hyperbole that is so unhealthy to our civic discourse, or this idea that like these aren't societal questions that if you're not part of this specific little niche, then you're not even allowed to have an opinion on it. And you're like, well, maybe my kid or my nephew or my cousin, someone I know is I mean, these are societal. Just because I might not want to have medically assisted suicide doesn't mean that I can't have an opinion about it. I'm not in a position to dictate it. I'm not a king or an emperor, but I'm a person pseudo-democratic representational political society, exactly. Right? That
pseudo.
Can we at least can we talk about these things, like, and just that's
well, and what the conversation we never seem to have or be allowed to have is why all of a sudden, like, so for example, I've been watching a lot of old movies lately. I've been working my way through Paul Newman's catalog for some reason. Mm-hmm. And so I watched the movie with Sidney Poitier last night, Paris Blues, and it was made in 1960.
I haven't seen that one, but
yeah, and I hadn't seen it either. I thought I'd seen like most of his movies. I hadn't seen it, and we watched it, and it was so interesting because I've seen a lot of things that are pre-war, right? All those classics, right? And then I've seen a fair amount of 70s, 80s, and 90s films, right? But then there's like the 60s. It's almost like this like missing period of film that I haven't seen a ton of films. I've seen a few, right? Like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and things like that. Mm-hmm. But I'm trying to consume that a little bit more because I'm that was a volatile period in our history. And I'm almost looking for clues. Like the last most volatile period in America in sort of recent after the Civil War, right, would be the 60s, where you had riots, you had assassinations, you had, whole cities were on fire. It was about as close as you're going to get to now in terms of people thinking the country was coming apart. People really did at the time. They thought nuclear war was about to start with Russia. There were a lot of really scary things going on if you talk to people who are young adults at the time. And so I'm watching this film looking for clues, looking for what can I discern about history. And a couple of things stood out to me. First of all, how fit and trim everybody was. And I'm talking about the extras. I'm talking about like everybody just roaming around on the street. I'm not talking about the actors and actresses, obviously. But we're told today that like, no, this is totally fit and healthy to be like morbidly obese. This is fine. Body positivity, all this kind of stuff. And while I do appreciate the move away from being, perfect, and the actors and actresses having to be absolutely perfect, I'm looking at, like I said, not even just the extras, but like the passersby in Paris, like over there across the street. I'm looking at everyone and I'm saying, yeah, I'm not seeing like anyone who's morbid. I'm not seeing any of that in any of these. And in a lot of these films, so there was kind of that. And I'm like, all right. So it's not like there were all these hidden fat people who couldn't leave their house for fear of stigma. And then too, the stuff about, I know that going back to Weimar, there was a small trans community in Germany, in particular, Berlin. Mm-hmm. And there have always been people who considered themselves what they used to call transsexual, or they cross-dressed or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it was a small community. And yet, if you just looked at popular culture, generic popular culture, movies, etc., again, there might be one gay character, like somebody over here in the Long Hot Summer, 1958. There's a fairly obviously gay character. They just don't say that he's gay. They say that he's not going to ever get married. And it's like, wink, nod. We know why, right?
A confirmed bachelor, I think.
He's a confirmed bachelor, right? So we kind of know, right? Yeah. But I'm looking at this, and then I look to today where they tell us these issues have always been this way. It's always been this way. It's just been covered up. It's been hidden. It's been oppressed. And I look back and I go, I don't think they could. Which is a better representation of the world? The art today, they're telling us, no, we're just representing reality now. Right? And then I'm like, so everyone was lying before and you guys are telling the truth. Or maybe there's a little bit of propaganda on both sides. Like maybe that was a little bit shined up and maybe you're shining it up to be the way you want it to look like. And regardless, because I've read enough history to know that there's more truth in what they were showing us in terms of just daily life. Like they didn't really have the budgets or the CGI to like make shit up. There's a limit to what they could do. And so I have to challenge that. Why aren't we asking enough? It's like, no, we literally have footage, even documentary footage of real life back then. And, reels of people talking and even people in Appalachia talking. And so, and I'm sorry, but no, this wasn't just all latent under the surface. It's new. Well, and why can't we talk about that?
There's this idea, and it's been popular in the academy and now in popular culture and media and of representation, right? And part of it is, it's part of this whole idea of what I call autoethnography. Some people call it me search instead of research.
Where's Adrian? She's still here.
But
appreciate that.
It's this idea of like, well, I'll tell a story of my lived experience, right?
Right.
And it's representative. I'm just gonna ignore that phone ringing over there. Okay. Sorry about that. Right. It's representative of the greater group, right? And this is what they call it, the generalist fallacy, right? Like one specific example of X of a person's life. Therefore, I am a representative of my community that identifies as such, and this is the truth of, well, yeah, it's true. And see, there's a truth claim there, right? There's a truth claim for that one person's experience and story. But when they then extrapolate it to represent the larger group or even a bigger community or society, right? Their situation, their exact experience represents society. Well, maybe not. Maybe it represents that the experience of people of that particular group within a certain neighborhood, within a certain city. But maybe the next town over, things were different, right? So they're making these gross, like vast assumptions. And instead of actually going and doing research, societal research, and finding out like how widespread and is it regional? Did it change? I mean, people, but then they'll turn around and say, well, down in the South, it was like that, and things were different in South London in the UK, and you're like, well, so things maybe weren't quite universal based on your one little anecdote. And of course, so I kind of like to. There was maybe a year or so ago, I used to poke at this at some sociologists and sort of the social justice activist type academics about this and say, look, guys, like you're supposed to be academics, doing research on society before, and you make these grand social pronouncements about everybody on the basis of their demographic or their sex or gender or whatever, or their skin color, and you make these statements, these generalizations, and it's all based on your anecdote, right? Or anecdata. It's another one I heard recently.
Anecdata. Oh, I like that one.
Yeah. And like, come on, you just don't want to do your homework, right? It was kind of, I was teased them a little bit. You just don't want to go do the work, do the work and do the research like you're supposed to do if you're calling yourselves academics and you're, sucking up the budget of some university who's employing you. Right. Exactly. No. Well, no. But then I'd have to actually go out and do stuff. And it's easier to sit in my office and think about my experience in this world. And, if I can just fit my head further up my, never mind. But anyway,
exactly.
Speaking of decolonizing, maybe they need to decolonize their research. That's sort of my view on it. But anyway, back to, I got sidetracked because the phone.
No, that's great because it's actually a good point, because I think in the past when they would make movies, even if they were trying, there was some social commentary in this film. There's a challenge. Sidney Poitier meets a woman played by Diane Carroll who's in Paris on vacation, and they fall in love, and she wants him to go back to the United States with her. And he says, no, I don't want to go back there. I'm here. I don't have to ask favors of anybody. I don't have to worry if I sit on a park bench, I'm going to get beaten. I don't, why would I want to go back there? And she says, that's your roots, and I'm not leaving my family to deal with. We'll deal with what we have to deal with. And he says, you're more interested in a cause than you are in us, right? And then she says, well, you're more interested in you than you're in me. And anyway, I want to get into how I really didn't like the female characters in this movie. They were very irritating, manipulative, but which was sort of interesting in and of itself, because I have a feeling that I was supposed to be sympathetic to them. If I had to guess, based on the whole tone of the movie and everything, I think I was meant to be on their side. And yet I'm sitting there yelling at the television and be like, bitch, he doesn't want to go home and be beaten, okay? He wants to be able to drink out of whatever water fountain he wants, So like, I was totally on his side. Like, he's got a career. He is happy. He's built a band and all this kind of stuff. But like, you want to be with him, you need to stay. Like that's like where I was with it. And she was like, we need to go home and fight, So that was as close as they came to some kind of like social justice, like some kind of message.
But they didn't beat your head. But they didn't beat you over the head with it, right?
No,
like Sidney Poitier made a number of films that address those types of issues, right? And he didn't. And I've never felt that they were moralizing, wagging the finger, right, at the audience. That they were just showing a situation. And here's where the specific can be political without being generalist, right? They're saying we're going to show you a story of specific
a couple.
situation.
It's like one specific couple. That's it. And that was a realistic challenge. You know, guys living in Paris and everything's great. Does he go back in 1960 to live in the United States during Jim Crow?
Yeah.
With this girl that he's met and he's fallen in love with, or doesn't he? What does he do?
Well, and are we appealing to the universal human condition, to your humanity as an audience member, to try to understand their plight and his plight, and maybe hers too, that they clearly they care about each other, but they have differences of opinion on how to deal with this issue. And that's a very real situation that can be transposed to all kinds of different situations, right? Like it could be like a Romeo and Juliet thing where like, look, I totally care about you, but my family hates your family. So how are we going to it's
a good point.
You know, these things transpose so we can relate to them, because many of us have been in situations like that, not that specific situation. So I think when you take the specific and you can make it political in art, like a Sidney Poitier movie where he's addressing these issues as a a black man in the early 1960s, and without sacrificing the characters and the story and the depth. And I think that's what happens when in more recent years, where we have a lot of these sort of ideologically driven narratives in art, in film and television, where and it's like almost like they break out of character for a moment and start mouthing these like a brochure for like the latest educational brochure from the woke movement. It's like, and you're like, whoa, wait a second. Like, why is that in there? And did the writers like, here's our diversity statement in the dialogue, right?
No kidding. And there was an example of that. I was folding laundry last week. And sometimes when I do that, I just put on them like Netflix, what's some fluffy little thing I can watch for an hour and not give a damn if I don't finish watching it. You know, so like I start going through. And there was some movie called The Wedding Season, right? So like, oh, what's this? And it's about an Indian, she's, Indian American, right, from India. And her parents, things are like, they like to have arranged marriages, whatever. And they're on her case because she's pushing 30 and she's not married. And, she's a hard driving economist and whatever. So they put a profile on the Indian dating site for her. And it's, of course, what the mom wants. It's not, she's like, Mom, I don't want this. And her whole speech is just what you said. It's like, I'm a woman and I'm this and I don't need it. Like, it was almost like a brochure for the, I'm a strong woman and I don't need my mom to make a dating thing for me, dating profile for me. And then I'm watching this thing and it was hilarious because there she is doing that. And then what does she do for a living? She's an economist, but she left working at a job, doing like some big important thing, some, making six figures, to go work for a nonprofit that's trying to get people to come in and use their nonprofit branding service to support impoverished women around the world. Like her entire job was a social justice brochure. Her entire character was a social brochure, and none of it was realistic. I'm like, yeah, I'm not believing that this woman who is so self-assured she's not getting married, I don't need a man, she gives up her awesome career to go work in this like go nowhere, do nothing, nonprofit, doesn't make any money, basically begging for crumbs kind of job, but we're helping impoverished women around the world. And then they're telling her big flaw is that she's so numbers oriented. She's really bad at conveying the heart behind the business. So they basically, her coworkers tell her she has no heart and no ability, no soft skills. So it's like an SEL brochure too. For social emotional learning. And they like the whole thing. I kept watching out of just sheer amazement. Like, how much can we pack into 1 hour and a half little made for Netflix movie and how contrived can we possibly be? And then of course the kicker is, you can guess the ending. Little Miss, I don't need my mommy to make me a dating profile, needed her mommy to make her a dating profile because it worked. And you're like, you guys, you're kind of missing I'm not buying it. Like your little message fell apart because she falls in love.
What was that show? It was like 2 years ago. I think it was Netflix, and it was like the name of two women's names, or two girls, like Georgia and something or other. Does this ring a bell?
Frankie and is it with with Jane Fonda?
No, not that one. This was like young women, and like the dialogue was so. I wish I could remember the name of it. I feel like it's like a Mandela effect sort of thing, where like they've erased its existence, because I've been like trying to figure out. I mean, I saw a few clips of it.
Two people's names. Okay.
I think. And anyway, the dialogue was just so ridiculously like over the top, like wokey dialogue, right? And and to the point where like nobody talks like this. And it was like two young girls, like teenagers or college age, late teen, and they were like yada 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 blah blah blah. And you're just like, woke brochure wrote this dialogue, right? And I can't, and people made it was so bad, people just made fun of it, right? And I think at the end of the day, I think that maybe I'm starting to lean, well, I've always leaned that way, to that this stuff needs to be kind of poked fun at, like when it goes too far. Right? Again, you can make things that are political, but when it goes too far, when it becomes finger wagging, sermonizing, moralizing, and when you're forcing people to conform all of a sudden, that, well, if you don't adopt the ideology of this thing, then you're, that's
or like when they take history and they rewrite it and make it super melodramatic. Like I saw a trailer for the movie Emily, where it's about Emily Bronte.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, I know enough about the history of the Bronte sisters to know that she was a little bit of an odd duck, and actually in a kind of a sad case. But the trailer makes it seem so, I mean, it is so over the top melodrama that it's kind of hard to take. It's just hard to take. So you have that, and then Netflix just redid Persuasion from Jane Austen,
which I heard was kind of meh.
I couldn't even watch the trailer. And then so I've watched more videos about it than I have watched it. I won't bring myself to do it because I've seen I'm a Jane Austen fanatic, so I've seen the other versions. And they said, why is it that Hollywood today can't do gentle character? Like they are just allergic to doing gentle characters, male or female, but especially female. That they don't understand that strength, especially in a woman, doesn't have to be Joan of Arc straight. It's like it doesn't have to wear a breastplate and look like a dude. It can be that quiet, resourceful, resilient, just steadfast. No, I'm not marrying anybody else but the person I'm really in love with, but I'm also not going to talk about it, whine about it, cry about it. I'm just going to go on with my life. Is a kind of strength. But we know we can't do that. We have to make her sassy. We have to make her snarky.
Is it a fad? Is it a fad? I mean, remember like maybe 10 years ago, there was a point, maybe a little longer ago, there was a point where like every politician that one year was crying on TV. Do you remember that?
True. Oh my God.
Remember it was like a thing?
Yes,
where like,
I totally forgot.
And you just show like, conservatives, liberals, Republicans, Democrats, and it would show how sensitive they were as human beings, right? And
I totally forgot. That's what you reminded me. Yes. Oh my God.
And like, I feel like this whole, and at least, is there a shift now? Because there was a while there where it seemed like every second female character on a TV show or movie was snarky, right? Snark. And it was like the writers, it wasn't the actors' fault, because the actors are hired, they I mean, maybe it was a little bit, but it was the writers, the writing team, when like they mistakenly thought that snark was funny, right? Like that it was banter. No, it's our banter. We're writing banter. We're going to write these characters. And so maybe they're now like, well, we're going to make them sassy, because sassy's the new crying in public. It's the new thing, right? That we all have to be sassy now. And they did sassy on Hulu. So Netflix, we got to do a sassy one, and
right.
And
I mean, it's not even the anachronisms. Like, okay, so there's, you put some stuff in that would be out of time, but when you completely disregard the values of the period, you just like throw that out also.
Yeah, where like you're writing you're doing a period piece set in the 1600s, and everybody talks like Buffy,
it doesn't, it just doesn't work, and it doesn't make the characters appealing, and it doesn't make them sexier. They just, I don't know there was that one they did, and then there was a modern version of Persuasion that I think Netflix also did that I watched. It wasn't even set; it was set in the modern day, and
which is the one with Dakota Johnson?
That's the one set in the Edwardian time.
Oh, that was the period piece. Okay. I caught like 5 seconds of that.
Regency.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But I can't stand her to start with. So like I struggle with her anyway.
Yeah.
But when you add in the fact that they make Anne one of Jane Austen's like really, most intelligent but sweetest, quietest, really one of her quietest, strong women. When they make her into this sassy little brat, I was just like, no, you can't do that to Anne. It's not fair. I'm really pissed off on behalf of this fictional character. It's like really making me mad. And so I couldn't watch it. I'm like, I can't bring myself to do it. I'll just be screaming at the television. So I refused. I watched the modern version where, ironically, they did a better job. It was a woman in a professional setting, and she was a little older. She wasn't married. She was working with much younger people. They had all the characters recreated pretty true to the Jane Austen characters. They just happen to be existing in the modern day, like a PR agency, okay, as opposed to like a family setting. And so, as you pointed out, they changed all of those particulars and set it in the modern day. But because they kept the overall nature of the characters, their character, that like their actual personal qualities, their values, their mindset about themselves, it worked better. So I'm like watching something that's taking place in the 2000s, and it's in a PR agency. It's not in a family or anything. And I'm like, this is more true to Jane Austen. This is more capturing the essence of the story.
It gave them an appropriate sense and sensibility for their time period.
There you go. Sense and sensibility. Work it in there.
And zombies. Sorry.
Sensibility and zombies. I have not.
It's sorry. I was like period pieces that have been changed.
I thought that was Pride and Prejudice.
No, zombies. No, it's Pride and Prejudice and zombies. Yes. Sorry.
I heard it's good, but I haven't seen it.
It's some pretty dumb fun. But like, if you're gonna, sorry, I got my names mixed up there.
That's okay.
If you're gonna like reinterpret something in its own period, right? Throw zombies in there. Like, let's go crazy.
Go all the way.
Or do you aim for some, at least some attempt at doing period properly, right? Like if trying to be at least as accurate to the time and as accurate to the milieu, to the culture and to the context of in which those stories are told or which they're set, even if they're fictional, right? Like it's a fictional story, but it's set in Victorian times, so let's do Victorian, or let's modernize it, or let's just go crazy and throw in zombies, right? Like
right
fine. I've always leaned towards, like, if you're going to do a historical piece, try to be I mean, you can dramatize, there's dramatic, poetic license, all that, but at least try to be somewhat faithful to the realities of the time period. Like for instance, years ago, I wrote a story about the Borgias, right? The Lucretia Borgia, particularly. And did we talk about this last time a little bit?
I think you mentioned it. Yeah, this is what your novels or.
Well, yeah, I did a historical novel on Lucretia Borgia, and part of the reason was that inspired me to do it was that I had seen a documentary or something where they talked about how she was this like vilified throughout history, and she was a real person who lived 500 years ago, and that Victor Hugo, who did, I think he did Les Miserables, right? Like Victor Hugo, big novel, novel about her, and other plays and operas and lots of movies in early Hollywood. The people done a lot of stuff back in the day about her, and they always had her as this evil temptress, poisoner, husband murdering, awful character.
Right.
And apparently the history, this documentary I saw was like, well, actually she was the good one in her family.
Is that because the Borgias were like completely insane?
No. Like, yeah, like by comparison, they were even worse. The idea is that she actually wasn't as horrid, or even she wasn't horrid at all, from what I could tell. And so I researched it. So I was like, well, what the hell? This is not right. And I was a history student. And I thought, I'll go and research it. So I went
Right.
to university libraries and haunted the stacks for months and digging up. I found sort like the journals of John Burchard, who was a scribe at the Vatican at the time, and his journals talked about her because she was there. She was the daughter of the Pope. I mean, living there, and no, from all accounts, she was not this salacious person at all. Especially not compared to her father and his mistress and her brother and all of his, antics. But anyway, so I wrote some stories about it, and it got pitched around. But there was another project going on, the Borgia, which became Neil Jordan was pitching the Borgia's project, and it became the series, which was very salacious and very dramatized and very sexy and all that. And you know what? Fun. That's great. And yeah, like you can have a bit of fun and ham things up a little bit, but you could still try to at least get it right on who were the dastardly ones, who were the ones who were kind of maybe victims. I took a view that she started off in my story that I wrote of her, my recounting of her tale, was that she started off as something of a little bit naive, a bit of an ingenue, a pawn of her father and her brother and their sort of political scheming. And then through the course of the story, where they marry her off to kill that husband because he's no longer useful politically, marry her off to somebody else, and then she starts chafing against this idea of being a pawn and starts taking control over her life and decides her own fate and her own future, and sort of breaks from their manipulations. And that's the story I told, because I felt like, and I tried to do it. It was interesting because so few people had this view at the time. This was, again, before the Borgia series came out.
Right.
That the Vatican in the 1500s could be like, orgy central, right?
You wouldn't think, but
no. Well, I mean, since the Borgia series came out, and everybody thinks, it's just a big sex party all the time. But
exactly.
Which apparently it was in the early High Renaissance. There was actually a quote from someone in the day. The quote I read was, "If all the children born in Rome this year came out with their father's clothes on, they would all be born priests and cardinals." In like 1500.
Wow.
Rome. So things are different from the celibacy and the Catholic Church these days. But sounds like they had a good time. Maybe drank a little wine back in the day. But
I wonder, what I there are a couple more things I wanted to talk about. Make sure we talked about today. Okay, so staying on the historical thing. I've been thinking a lot lately about how history might dramatize the events of the last, let's say, 6 years or so, right? So everything from the Trump story and Russiagate and all that, and, FBI, blah, blah, blah. And then also COVID. And I keep thinking, like, who would we cast? Like, if we had to cast it with people alive today, like, who would play these people? And what would make the most, I mean, obviously, I think telling the truth would make the most compelling story, but we've already seen what they try to do, like with the Valerie Plame story. That was just completely ridiculous. They've already, they try to dramatize things really soon after they've done it.
Yeah.
They've already told the Gabby Gifford story. They're already doing a Gabby Giffords one that's all weird. Anti-gun, and it's like,
it's weird.
Yeah,
it's weird, like how they, it used to be like, didn't you wait till everyone was dead before doing the historical period piece about them? Like,
right?
Is our memories getting so much shorter now that, like, stuff that happened last year is ancient history in our little minds? Like, are we goldfish now? Like, we don't remember what we did 2 seconds ago? I
think so. I seriously do. I mean, I see people still to this day who are absolutely adamant that Kyle Rittenhouse shot black people.
Yeah, I know. That's so weird.
I'm like, so weird. What the hell?
Yeah. Well,
and got away with it. Got away with murder.
Well, and this
just murdering black people. And I'm like,
this speaks
are we living on the same planet?
Well, and that's actually something that I sort of jotted a little note down that I thought we might touch upon is And is it that we're all becoming more siloed in our information, that we're living in these smaller and smaller bubbles where we only consume the media that we've curated for ourselves? Like, I will only listen to.
Have we really curated it for ourselves,
well,
David, or is it the Truman Show?
Yeah, well, that's it, right? Like, well,
I don't know.
well, if like people who, like, for instance, the news channel they watch is CNN, so all they know is the CNN version of things, right? And then someone else, they only know the Fox and Friends version of things, and someone else only knows the MSNBC version of things, and it's like that's their channel of choice, or their news sources, whatever they read, or their newspaper, or their website, or their social media community, right? Where they subscribe to a block list, so they completely get rid of anybody and everybody who has a different point of view. And I was thinking about this, sort of questioning myself, because I just sort of, I've recently hit the block button pretty hard on a number of people in the last couple months. And it's like, and I used to almost pride myself on not blocking anybody. Like, I had only 2 people muted and nobody blocked for the longest time. And the 2 people were muted are just people I like consider the most toxic people on the internet. But
okay, I'm dying to know who they are. Who are the most toxic people on the internet?
Well, the ones that are still on the internet, right? Like, because there were some others who, like, like, obviously, you got your full on, sort of neo-Nazi types. They're toxic, and they're not on the internet anymore, right? Like, they're
right. I got you. Okay,
they're on, like, they have their own server and their little somewhere in North Dakota, but 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 no, I mean, no offense to people from North Dakota, but, like, I heard there's like some crazy guy lives up in the far corner. His name's Bill. Anyway,
Bill.
Allegedly. Anyway, like, so we have these little bubbles, right? And we only know our version, like you said, like, people who are still convinced that Rittenhouse was, like, shooting black people, and they haven't watched any of the footage. They haven't read it. They just, maybe they got it from their Facebook group of concerned moms that they're, or whatever, like, about, or like environmentalists who, I heard something about rolling coal the other day. You know what rolling coal is?
No.
Like, okay, I think it's, like when you have a diesel, and all the automotive people out there can put in the comments and correct me and tell me how little I know about this stuff. But like, when you have like a diesel truck or whatever, and you modify it so that when you hammer the gas, it throws black smoke out the pipes, right? And often you might do an upright stack, right? Yep, and I see it like because I do watch a lot of automotive YouTube. That's kind of my little guilty pleasure of mine, where they're like at events, they'll do that, and you'll see the trucks belching this black stuff out, right? Somebody was like, that's the evilest thing in the world, that they do it to the cyclists and the environmentalists. I'm like, what? I never heard of that, right? So this is somebody who's totally convinced that was the whole reason that this whole rolling coal thing exists, was so that you can stick it to the environmentalists and blow black smoke in their face, and to cyclists and all the greenies. And I was like, I've never even heard of that, but I've seen them do it at like automotive events when they're, for an effect. Or they're just yahoos out in the backwoods of, some state with no environmental laws. They're in Florida somewhere,
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And just because they think it's cool. I've never ever heard of it or seen of them actually using this to target anybody. That idea seems strange to me, but totally convinced. Again, where do they get these ideas from? Where do they get this idea, that these narratives?
Exactly.
And so we're all living on different planets almost, right? Like, if your version of reality is so different from mine or for somebody else's, like, I had an interaction the other day, was talking about, hitting the block button, where and I mentioned a bunch of names of people. Someone said, well, everybody's like X, everybody's like this. And I said, that's not true. Not everybody who believes this thing are, there was a claim that everybody who's anti-woke they're all MAGA, and I'm like, that's not true. There's lots of different people from different groups, different communities, who are sort of questioning a lot of this sort of woke ideology and the critical race theory, intersectionality, and the gender theory and all this stuff, questioning how, maybe it's gone too far and being critical of it. That doesn't automatically make them like a MAGA Trump supporter, right? Well, they overlaps and it's the scratch, and I'm like, and then I named a bunch of people who were prominent critics, who were generally moderates, and from different political persuasions too. Some of them liberals, some of them, and I think they even said, well, I haven't heard of half those people. And I'm like, how could you not know of half these people? What version of the internet are you using? What version of Twitter do you have? Like, have they curated it? Have they blocked and muted so many people that they only hear certain sector or certain segment of it? Or is the algorithm feeding them that, right? That's the other part of it. And this is where it gets creepy, right? Goes back to Truman Show.
Exactly.
Right? You remember was it 2014 that Facebook had to came out and apologize for allowing psychological experiments on like 693,000, like 700,000 almost of their Facebook users. And that's the one that got caught, right? That's the one they we know about.
Exactly. How many do we not know about?
And they were trying, if I remember correctly, they were trying to see if they could make people happier or more depressed by tweaking their newsfeed or their timeline or whatever you call it on Facebook. I don't use Facebook anymore. But so I'm like, wait a second, you were actively trying to make people more depressed or happier by manipulating what information they saw. Like, so we're going to give them I don't know how they did it. What was the approach? Like, we're going to give them a barrage of horribly disturbing, upsetting, depressing, demotivational things and see if I'm like, and then what? Like, see if they jump out a window. Like, what the,
what's your plan?
Yeah. Like, how are you measuring this? Like, are you doing some eye tracking with their camera to see if the tears start, like, or they disengage? What? So part of the problem, I think, and I believe, if I remember correctly, this was part of some study that some group was doing and Facebook was letting them do it. But how much are the platforms themselves engaging in tweaking and testing us? Like, let's mess with them and see how they react. Like, we're their little guinea pigs.
Exactly. And I wonder sometimes how much is even happening to me. I'll look through my feed and I'll see things and I'll kind of catch myself, in terms of not realizing something has gone on. Because it didn't even show up on my feed. And I then wonder, because I don't tend to read a lot of, news. Okay. So anything that comes through that's like, CNN, anybody, it could be any source. I tend not to click on it. I tend not to read it. I read exclusively the education news and things like that. What's happening, I tend to glean what's happening in the like day to day or whatever from what other people are commenting on. And if I start seeing a preponderance of comments about, some bill or other or whatever, then what I do is I go and I look up the bill. Like, I go and I try to find like the legislation as written. I don't want to read what people are saying about the bill. I'm just like, oh, there must be a new bill out. I better go read, or the Supreme Court just delivered a decision. I got to go read the decision because I don't want to know. I'm like this. I don't want to know what all of you think about it. I'm actively avoiding. Well, it's like, no spoilers, please.
Yeah. The opinionism isn't what you're there for. You want to actually read the content.
It's not only not valuable, I find it to be detrimental to my understanding of what's going on, because then what I have to do is I find myself reading, if I catch somebody's interpretation, like, oh, goddamn Clarence Thomas or whatever, I'm like, oh shit, right? Then I go and I have to read it, and then the whole goddamn Clarence Thomas is like echoing in my ear, and I have to first shut that up before I can read it. And this is, I think, what they do to us. Even if you are the most attentive person out there, and I'm not the most, but like, if you're trying, you're still battling. It's like, stop. I don't need everybody's opinion until I'm ready for it. And then when I'm ready for it, generally I'll come out, I'll give my opinion, and then I'll see what other people have to say or whatever. But I have to first digest it in some kind of primary source if it's actual events like Ukraine stuff or whatever. I haven't really commented on Ukraine that much, except to say, oh, it has war at the end and we're giving money to it, I'm against it. It's like, because I feel I'm on solid ground. I'm like on solid ground that there's something called war and we're sending money there. No, like the onus is on you to sell me on why that's a really super positive thing for us to be doing, not for me to explain why I oppose it. So, I just default to no and move on. But
so you want to bypass the spin, right, and actually get to the news. And that's because, and I think that that's a product of, I mean, people say, well, there's always some bias, right, in news reporting, in journalism, and I've always believed that the quality of your journalism is directly proportional to how well you mitigate your bias, right? Like, but instead of doing that, instead of making efforts to tell you the news, to like present the latest bill as it is and let you make up your own mind about it and say, well, there are different perspectives on it. Here are some interpretations. Here you go. Now we furnished you with the information about it. And here's a link to the bill. If journalists could actually like include links to some of the stuff that they report on and quote, that would be really useful. So many don't. But instead, it seems to me that the sort of field of journalism has abandoned
journalism. It feels like infotainment at this point.
Like it's become like opinionism, or just everything is an op-ed. Because, well, they're all activists, right? It's journalism as activism as journalism. And same thing in education. We're seeing so much of that, like activism as education. Like, well, I'm an educator, therefore I must be activist at all times. And then I'm going to teach all the kids to be activists too, because everyone should be an activist always about all things. And and then you end up with people who are really good at parroting activists ideology and quotes and rhetoric, but they can't do math.
Exactly.
And they can't, their reading levels are below grade, and we're seeing that, and people we're seeing more of that. And I think that sort of speaks to a lot of stuff that you cover a lot of the time and are talking about.
Yeah, that's why they call themselves educators and not teachers anymore. I mean, sometimes they'll say teachers, but I had a teacher on the other day and he said educator, and he kind of put it in quotes. And I said, why do you think they chose that word? He said, well, they want to feel more important. He said, but there is a difference. He said a teacher sees it as their job to teach children how to think, like, in other words, how to conceptualize, how to form concepts in their own minds. Whereas an educator, if you think of like re-education camp, right? An educator is more like, just, that's a fancy word for an indoctrinator. I mean, it's something I'm going to school you in the right way to think, like what to think, not how to think. Because an education can often be seen as the sum total of the knowledge that you have when you're kind of done with it, right? So if they're an educator, I'm going to give it to you. Here you go. Here's the knowledge I want you to have. These are the thoughts I want you to have. These are the opinions I want you to have. And it's not really teaching you how
to think for yourself,
to do it for yourself. And that's what they're doing now. And I feel like they're backed up a lot of times by the entertainment industry, journalism. I'm not seeing that much of a difference between entertainment and journalism. They're kind of like, there's so much drama. There's so much, gossip. There's just so much focus on really petty crap that it feels like, the weekly news of the world, at the checkout counter is now the Washington Post. It's kind of ridiculous. But I still feel like there are some pieces of entertainment that I've seen recently that have made me smile and gave me a little hope. As we talked about before we came on the show, I just want people to tell stories again. And I feel like when people feel like they either want to tell stories and just tell stories, or they want to tell interesting stories that don't finger wag, it gives me a little hope, because it makes me feel like people are either pushing back on the narratives that tell them what they should be doing, or they are waking up. And I was wondering if you had seen anything at all in popular culture recently that made you say, that was a good story, or I wonder if that person's just wanted to is sick and tired of being told what to cover, what to do.
In terms of content, like in terms of shows that I've seen, and then there's a number that I want to see, but I haven't seen yet. I mean, I've heard that numerous people say the new Top Gun movie, for instance, they're like, it's just a movie. When was the last time you saw
a movie?
It's just a movie. You like it, you go, you eat your popcorn and you're entertained.
Yeah.
Right. And like, when was the last time you watched just a movie?
Exactly.
And you weren't getting someone's heartfelt struggle about whatever, And I mean, there's a point where you're like, you know what? I've seen so many heartfelt struggles, and this is horrible to say. Horrible, right? Because we're all like, we want to be, we want to sympathize and empathize and be good people.
I'm kind of over it. I'm out. I'm empathied out.
Yeah, like I don't care about your heartfelt struggle anymore, because like I got my own heartfelt struggles.
No, it's true.
And you want me to pay like
don't care
to like absorb yet another, just like, sorry, the things that are flowing in my mind here to say to those people are things that might get you demonetized. So anyway, I don't want to do that. Just like, enough already. Let me just watch a movie. Or here's another thing, and I guess it speaks to what we were talking about earlier. So much of it seems so contrived. So you can have things that are specific, that are somebody's struggle, that are political or whatever, if they're not contrived, if they're authentic stories.
Yeah.
And this is it's a bit of a sidestep to your question. The other day, do you know Jonathan Kay? John Kay? He writes, he's one of the editors, I think, Canadian editor for Quillette.
Oh yeah, I think I do. Yeah, now that you mentioned Quillette, I think I do.
He was posting about this organization. It's a Canadian film organization called Telefilm.
Okay.
And so in Canada, there's very little private film and TV industry. Most of there is some private money in it. They do have some TV channels. There's a couple film companies, but nothing. It's mostly government funded. There's a film and television fund. There's the Telefilm, which funds movies, and then there's a bunch of tax credit programs. And when you cobble it all together, all this money from the government, you might be able to make something. And that nobody ever goes to see for most of them. They go to a festival, and then they end up sitting on a shelf. But because traditionally or typically, they'll fund the production, they'll fund a little bit of festival activity, but they won't fund the release. You won't see, well, in English, now French Canada, Quebec, right, is a whole other, it has its own industry, and they have this whole way of protecting their culture to the point where they get a little crazy about it too, but at least they do it. English-speaking Canada, I think I haven't checked the numbers in the last few years, but for a long time, and I can't imagine it's changed a whole lot, the percentage of the box office in English Canada for Canadian films is like maybe 2 or 3%. Like not so high 90s percentage of movie tickets sold are for Hollywood American product, right? And anyway, so Telefilm exists because they're like, well, then we have to have the government fund everything, because
of course,
right? So of course, because it's and because the government's funding it, and we have Justin Trudeau and his
we just need more Letterkenny.
Well, Letterkenny's
that's
great.
What's missing. I love Letterkenny,
but
I need more Letterkenny. I'm like in withdrawal from Letterkenny now. Yeah. I need more.
Well, so Letterkenny, right, is it's low budget, right? Doesn't have huge support, but it has a great fan base because it's fun, right? But anyway, this organization, it's called Telefilm. It's like, well, we want to start pushing authentic storytelling. And what and I think what they're meaning by authentic storytelling is this thing I was talking about, where stay in your lane, and not like, if you're of a certain background, then you tell stories of that background, and someone who's not of that background shouldn't be telling stories. And it's all part of the sort of like, we want to encourage diversity. And it's like, how about just let people be inspired to tell stories? Because every individual has a unique perspective. And that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see people being more creative, being inspired to something by an experience they had, and tell that story without making it some big political diatribe, right? Exactly. So I went on their website and filled out their survey, and basically told them that they should fire all their DEI consultants, and I even signed my name to it. And I'm like, that's like, as a filmmaker who's also Canadian, that's like kiss of death, I guess. I'll probably, but whatever, right? Like, they're not going to fund anything, from me anyway. So why bother? Why not criticize them?
But then authentic. It's just another one of their words like diversity, equity, inclusion. They don't mean authentic. They mean completely contrived.
Exactly. And that's the problem, right? It's so contrived. What they end up producing, what they end up generating is this propaganda that it, like the Soviets called it agitprop, when they would make films and television shows and theatrical productions that were for the purpose of pushing the government message, or iterations or expressions that come from the dominant ideology, right? And you know, and I would love to hear people's stories from all different backgrounds, but just tell me the damn story. Don't beat me on the head with why you're telling me the story and the work I need to do in order to understand it, become a more sensitive, progressive individual, right? And then conform with you. So back to your question about stuff that's like I saw, and again, we were talking about people in different bubbles,
right,
and how people interpret things differently. Like I saw on Twitter a while back, people were talking about this Chris Pratt series on Amazon, the Terminalist.
Yeah.
And people saying, "Oh, it's this right wing fantasy of," and I'm like, "Oh, what?" You know, and I had heard that like all the social justice people were mad at him because he went to some right-wing church that was mean to gay people or something, and then that turned out to be a lie, that it was not true, right? And then I'm like, well, what about this show? Is it some sort of like, because I'm as much as there's all this wokey stuff, right, that I don't particularly like. I find it really fake and just contrived and cheap and hollow. I don't want to see the pendulum go the other way, where it's like bash over the head, rah, right? We get into like jingoistic, like, you know, stuff that is from, you know, some sort of alt-right wet dream where everybody's, you know, like President Camacho, you know, like the sort of idiocracy kind of stuff going on. So I watched this series, the Chris Pratt Terminalist. So you've seen it? You've seen it. Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm watching it, waiting for all the right-wing stuff.
All the right-wing stuff, right?
And I'm like, this is like a pretty standard, like, spy thriller, military, we got double-crossed, blah, 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 you know, like, with some psychological elements. And I didn't really see the, you know, maybe I'm what was it? What maybe it's my invisible knapsack of cishet white whatever metrosexual privilege or whatever, that I'm oblivious to the right winginess of it all or something. But
I think they were just really hypersensitive to the pharma company. You know, the idea that there's like some kind of relationship with big pharma and the military or the government, and then they're bad guys, unless. And apologies to those who haven't seen it. I mean, I'm not really giving that much away. You can,
because it was critical.
Out of the, and which is so funny because remember when the left was really critical of big pharma?
Yeah, like
that was like 10 minutes ago. Like what until before COVID, it was big pharma is bad, right? Yeah. Then suddenly we have COVID and it's like Pfizer. People are putting like Pfizer around.
How dare you criticize my Moderna? You know, like
right. And so I think what they were saying is that the idea that you could have a story, and it's based on a book, and I'm pretty sure the guy wrote the book before all that, but it's based on a book,
a novel, right?
Yeah. Right. And I think that was their issue, because what has happened is the news media and the government, and even the entertainment industry has incorrectly conflated people who are either, you know, pro COVID vaccine and anti-COVID vaccine with their political party. There are some trends, to be sure, but I know just as many people who would say they vote reliably Republican who are eager to run in and get it, as I know people who are, you know, just plain old garden variety Democrats who were like, you know, I don't know, I'm not down with this. Okay, so I don't think you could be so clear cut on these lines, but the news media wanted everyone to believe that for some reason.
Well, and the
politicians,
a lot of the politicians wanted to believe that
on both sides too. You know, they had red ones going like, "Oh, we're team no shot," and then the other ones going, "You know, we're team shot," and a
lot of people being really quiet and keeping their mouths shut through that because it was so polarized and everyone was
He was like, I don't really want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about my status.
They were either legitimately afraid of this horrible thing that they were hearing about, or they were legitimately worried that they was going to damage their personal relationships with people.
Right.
Because so many people were scared and being irrational and in many ways, but also being overcautious or not cautious enough. Like, it was just.
Well, and when before in our history did we walk around casually discussing as adults some healthcare decision we were or weren't making with our neighbors, our coworkers, our
1918, boss? The Spanish flu, right?
Right.
100 years ago, right? And long enough ago that basically civilization forgot. And if I don't know if you saw any of the articles that they dredged up. They had old articles from the day where they show people they had this picket signs, they had masks, and other people picketing against the masks and protesting it. And I'm like, holy crap, it's the exact same stuff. Like 100 years ago, the exact same arguments, the exact same bickering. I mean, some. I don't know what if they had as many conspiracy theories. They didn't have the internet back then, so maybe a few fewer.
Well, I can only think, and then the thing too with Terminalist is it's anti-military. It's solidly anti-military. I mean, it's
well, is it though? Like it or is it anti-corruption? It's pro-soldier.
It's definitely pro-soldier.
It's like big on the honor.
Pro-individual, pro-individual person and the camaraderie that units might feel and so forth. Right. But it's definitely anti-corrupt leadership. It's definitely anti swamp dweller,
which used to be like the leftist
totally
view.
That's why I'm like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah,
that they've ever saying it's some kind of right wing thing. I'm like, so okay, if that's true, then what you're basically telling me is that now the left wing is pro big pharma, pro high level government organization running people's lives for some greater good that has absolutely nothing to do with the individual. The individual throwaway. Yeah. We can actually experiment on people, and when things aren't working out, we can just cut them loose and we'll never tell them. And this to me would be tailor made for what used to be the Cindy Sheehans of the world, and the left wing activists. And now they're saying this is right wing. It's bizarre. I think honestly, if you want to know the truth, it had to do with it being Chris Pratt.
Right.
Chris Pratt, Christian. Okay, so we have Chris Pratt is a Christian, ergo everything he touches must be right wing because Christians are all white wing. That's like their little.
That's trope. The narrative. That's the narrative.
That's the narrative. And so if he's in something where he's also a soldier or an ex, Navy
now he's
SEAL,
a Christian nationalist.
Must be, because nobody Christian should also put on a uniform without being inherently a bad person. So I think a lot of people who didn't even see it were putting those tiny little tidbits together and saying this. But if you actually sat down and watched it, my complaints about it were that I thought some of the psychological stuff that was in there was a little ponderous.
Yeah, they milked that a little hard.
They milked it because, honestly, my honest opinion is it was a series. It wasn't a movie. And so when you're trying to drag it out to a certain number of episodes for whatever reason, then you have extra time and like these close-ups and then pan out and then let's ponder this and let's have a flashback and let's have a cutaway. And then, and for those of us who just want to watch the story in a little bit more linear form, it gets a little frustrating. You appreciate some of the backstory, but some of them are just not purposeful and annoying. But on the whole, I thought it was entertaining. I thought it was very frustrating at times because certain kinds of thrillers and stuff can be frustrating, but it was part of the story that it wasn't like, oh my God, hurry up and get to the chase. It was just part of the story. So I liked it. I thought it was certainly one of the better done things I'd seen in a while. Not great, but definitely good.
It wasn't like the mind-blowingly amazing, but it wasn't bad. It was a good little show. It was a fun thriller. It could have been a movie. It might have been a longish movie or and
there were characters I wish were developed a little more and a few that I wish were developed a little less. So it had its moments.
It had a good cast too.
It definitely did. Yeah. And there were some parts in it that I thought were quite thoughtful and good, in terms of like, think about what matters to you in life and things like that. So I didn't have any issues with it. And I was actually surprised to see all the flack. But my immediate impression was it's Chris Pratt, he's Christian, and he was a former Navy SEAL, ergo it must be. This is just so simplistic. And that's where, like I said, I think of things like the Truman Show when people go like data point, that means this, that we've become this kind of Well, you just said it a little while ago. What did you call it? You called it something data?
Oh, anecdata. Yeah,
Anecdata. Like,
anecdata. Yeah.
yeah, I feel like that's what we're dealing with now, is people have heuristics for their heuristics.
Well, and just
shortcut.
Well, that's it, right? And when you do these shortcut, right, using labels and stereotypes, right? These assumptions. I mean, what are we doing when we're making these grand statements of assumption about complicated or nuanced things or involved storylines? Like we're saying, well, it's just a big right-wing thing. Why? Because it has this and this. Therefore, check. Right? It's like, are our brains now functioning like you said, like some crappy questionnaire on a website?
Yeah. We're all the BuzzFeed quiz.
Right. And now, like, find out how right-wing you are, how gay are you, like like,
which cartoon character are you?
Yeah, like, you're mostly like Wile E. Coyote. I
hope not.
I feel like Wile E. Coyote a lot of the time on the internet. But I'm like, oh, here I go off the cliff again. My Acme rocket has failed. But no, but at the end of the day, like, what are we doing with this shortcut? But is it not just like the activism? I don't, people who are prejudging things that they haven't seen. Most of them haven't even seen it, haven't bothered to watch it. They just say, well, it's got this, that, and that, therefore it must be that. And I'm like, well, is this not functionally prejudice? Yeah, are we not using these shortcuts and labels to engage, to start operating on a basis of prejudice, right? And whatever happened, like, don't judge a book by its cover. What a reserving judgment, right? Like, well, I'll wait till I've seen it before I decide whether it's good or bad or ugly,
Right. Speaking of that, though, even in terms of books, have you noticed that we, when people are titling their books, especially children's literature, and designing the covers, it's like they want you to judge the book by the cover.
Well,
everything now is a sales pitch of, I want to give you as much up front to validate you as possible. The movie that I was telling you about before we came on, that movie Vengeance, one of the points that Ashton Kutcher's character makes, he says, art used to control us. Like, you'd have to buy a whole album and you didn't really know half of what was on it. You might know the single that was played on the radio, but you didn't know the other, 8 songs or something, and you'd have to buy it and figure it out later. Yeah. Or borrow it from a friend or wait for the radio to play the other songs. So we were more now, because we can customize and control art to such a degree and now the algorithms are written to figure out what we already like, that our experience with art is essentially like a reflection of what we already know, what we already like, what we already are. So all we're doing is saying, validate me, artwork,
which is boring, right? Like, don't you
I would think so. Ew. I want new things. I don't want to just what I already like.
And it seems to me like a lot of the algorithms, the advertising and learning algorithms that are trying to track the things we like, trying to figure out and then serve up more of the same, right? Like,
yeah,
Netflix, based on what you've watched, we think you'd like this. And I'm like, like, stop trying. You know what I would like instead? Give me a questionnaire. Give me a page on the website. If I could go to Netflix's website, hey, Netflix, if you're listening, if I could go to their website and give me like a bunch of boxes to tick and check of things I'm interested in this year, right? Like, I'm feeling in the mood for more historical dramas, or I'm feeling in the mood for more sci-fi, and then serve me up more of that stuff. Let me tell you what I want right now. Because and maybe and if I check the box for, like, give me a randomized selection of just rando stuff, because I like sometimes random finds, right? Like, the idea that they're gonna figure you out, right? That they're gonna, like, we're gonna spy on you, right? This whole surveillance capitalism, and then figure out what it is that you want now. And then people end up being like, so I bought 6 boxes of mac and cheese, and now they're telling me that I should buy some mac and cheese, and I already got 6 boxes. Like the advertisers or the people doing this research, this marketing research, like, are they half stupid or what? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like, what a waste of time, when it would be so much easier just to ask us, like I would fill that out. Would you fill that out? Like if your Netflix had like it's like,
Yeah.
hey, we would love it to personalize your selections, and instead of trying to guess based on what you've been watching, tell us. Like didn't like.
I wouldn't mind if they gave this to me every time I sat down, because I mean, how many of us, if we had a show of hands, but everybody's hands in the air, how many of us have sat down to pick from our streaming channels, and for the next hour, click, scroll, click, watch the trailer, no, click. It's like an hour goes by and you're like, and I mean, look, they've had their algorithms feed me up. You might like this, based on what you watch. And I'm like, I'm in a mood. So if I could tell them what my mood was, it would save me the hour of going, no. It's like when you go to Cheesecake Factory and there's like, here's this yellow, the yellow pages of food choices. And you're like, can you just show me the salty things? I just want the salty things. I'm in a salty mood. Can I have the salty foods? Or I need
dessert
cheese.
Menu. Yeah.
Yes, right. Can you just show me the things with the cheese?
Right.
It would be so much easier than I don't want pasta. I don't know. Is it cheese?
Well, do you remember for movies on like film and television? Do you remember categories, the old categories based on the content? Like comedies, action, sci-fi, drama, rom-com, children's.
They still have that a little bit, but they can't help themselves. They're like, black voices.
Yeah, you're like, what's all identity stuff now, right?
Strong women in film,
I'm and you're like yes, I always sit down and think, geez, I'm really in the mood for a strong female character today. No, I mean, you think I want to watch an
maybe
action
immediately
movie.
after a breakup or something. There might be girls who want that, but
sure, or which is fine. Like, but just like the problem is they're getting rid of the classic characters. I'm like, no, where do I find the damn action? And I'm always click trying to find, because I'm like a sci-fi junkie, right? Sci-fi fantasy. So I'm always like, where are any new sci-fi fantasy movies? And I'm looking for that category, and it used to be easy to find, and I got to scroll to all this other identity crap that I don't care about. And it's not that I don't care about it because it's the identity. That's not the reason I watch something. I don't watch a TV show or a movie because it has some representation of myself or anybody else. Like, I really don't care if the show is a show about women, right? Like A League of Their Own, a new series that's on is it on Prime?
I think so, but that's one like kind of based on the movie they made by the same name.
That's the thing. When that movie came out like 20 years ago or more, 25, how many years? 25 years ago?
At least.
It was like Lori Petty and it was Gina Davis in it. Like, so I went to the theater to watch that movie when it came out.
Same.
Right? Because I liked all those actresses. I'd seen them in other things, and it looked like a fun movie.
Right.
I went to see it because it looked like a fun movie.
Right. That's it.
Right?
Not because you were interested in like strong female characters playing a boy's game.
Yeah, right? Like, you're like, whatever. It looks like a fun movie. It looks like a great story, and I'm interested in that, in just good movies. As opposed to like, they didn't need to sell it on its politics or that it represents this and that. And you can find things to relate to in the characters, whether they look like you or not. Right. But there's this idea now that like, oh, well,
like I could relate to Tom Hanks. There's no crying in baseball.
Right. But like you don't need like nobody needs to like, we're capable of relating to many different characters because we've all been in so many different life situations that different people have been in, and they're not unique to us based on your skin color, your where you live, or your
Are we though, or is it generational? I wonder. See, we're sitting here going on like, oh, we can do this and we want this and we want that. And then I think, well, I don't know. Do they know something we don't know about Gen Z right? Because I mean, I would love to think they're just idiots. But on the other hand, they're billionaire idiots. Like, I mean, we had a lot of technology at their disposal. And I'm wondering, and then there's which came first, the chicken or the egg?
I've met
Are they responding to this, or are they making the kids like this so they can? That's what I say about SEL. They're making the kids predictable so they can sell them what they've already got. And it's a nice little thing.
Well, and that's it, right? Like, so again, it feels contrived. It doesn't feel like they're basing it on the actual content they're basing it on these shorthands, these shortcuts, these assumptions, right? And like, just because it fits in it's set in a certain milieu doesn't necessarily mean it's going to actually appeal to people on that basis. But you're right. Like, maybe why are they categorizing things? I mean, I think they're doing a lot of experimenting too. I think they're seeing what people like, what people respond to, what they don't respond to. True. Problem is, if it was natural and organic, that would be great. But because there's so much activism going on behind the scenes at a lot of the media companies, right? We know about Netflix, right? Like, remember the sync with Dave Chappelle, and then all of a sudden there was a bunch of employees who didn't protest it, and same thing. I think Penguin Books had their employees crying and protesting and saying we don't. And I think Hachette also had that issue, if I'm not mistaken. Like, so the publishing and media and film and television worlds, there is a lot of this stuff, and there's a lot of activists working within these companies, and some of them are doing it in a subversive way, or kind of trying to use their positions to inject their personal politics into the companies they work for. But I think there's also some of these companies maybe are engaging in some of their own experimentation to see if, is politics something we can use to market product? Right?
The reason I asked is because, I'll go to the movies with my kids, and it's happened. Like, when I went to the most recent Spider-Man, and I liked most of the iterations of Spider-Man. I mean, most of them. I didn't love them, but I liked some of them. And this one I went to it, and I mean, I was insufferable. I'm not gonna lie. I was kind of insufferable sitting there. I was like,
yeah.
Oh God, really? Like, I mean, I didn't loudly say it, but I was like under my breath muttering. And my daughter's sitting next to my 14-year-old. She's like, can you just watch the freaking movie? Yeah. And I mean, at one point I had to kind of get up and not leave the theater, but I went and like stood by myself by, where like the ramp comes up, because I just couldn't help myself. I have a terrible poker face anyway. And when I'm watching something that is just groan worthy every step of the way in terms of its politics and its message and everything, I was like, I'm going to throw up. This is so ridiculous. And so
there were a few moments. Yeah.
And there've been a couple of times that has happened in movies. So we were heading off to see Bullet Train, and all-star cast, and there's people in it I like very much. And so, as far as their acting ability, not personally. And I said, I really hope this is good. And she turns to me, she goes, all those movies we've seen are good. You just hate movies for the dumbest reasons, right? And I was like, and I told her, I said, what gets me is like the casual meanness of your generation. You're just so casual about, you don't like movies for the dumbest reasons. And then she felt very bad. She's like,
well, I think that may just be kids. I think
no, it is. It is
all kids of all generations.
Like, well, I'm just saying, you're a teenager. I'm just saying.
Mom and dad don't know anything.
Right. We're
parents just don't understand. Didn't Will Smith say that?
But her point was, she goes, can't you just let it go and just enjoy it? Can't you just enjoy it? Why do you have to be like that? Can't you just enjoy it? And she wasn't wrong, because I'm sitting there thinking about it, and I'm like, why can't I? Like, what's wrong with me that I can't just sit and watch this last Spider-Man movie and just like let it wash over me and not sit there and like comment on or feel annoyed by the little finger wag. And the only thing I could think of is because it's a finger wag. And because I know it is, and because it's happening so persistently that after a while, you're like, I just paid good money, like not a small amount of money, to come here. And in addition to sit through 20 minutes of commercials before you began, I have to deal now with you pushing a worldview at me. I can't just enjoy a story. So I'm not able to just let that go. First of all, I perceive it where I don't think does. She doesn't have the same perspective.
Well, once you see the strings, once you see the manipulative strings,
it's that Truman Show thing that I was telling you about. It's like, I'm seeing the cracks, and she's sitting in there going, what? It's like, it's the Truman Show. It's awesome. And I'm like, that's a fake sky. Yeah. And I can't just enjoy it because I know the sky is fake.
Yeah.
That's my problem.
Well, and that's it, right? You're like, you see that there is a manipulation going on. You see that that things aren't entirely what, that there's other stuff being injected into it, right? And you're just like,
they're not just telling me a story. They're telling me that it's perfectly appropriate to sacrifice your beloved aunt for a supervillain if there's even the smallest chance you could save him, because he could really be a good person underneath his supervillainness. And there I am wanting to scream at the screen. I'm like, you moron. And it doesn't matter if you're vindicated. It doesn't matter. You're just like, I know the message they're sending. It was worth it. I'm like, no, it wasn't. That was stupid. That was evil. Well, it's freaking evil.
What's with this? It's so, and I blame George Martin for this idea that look, it's deep if we kill people off,
oh, I hate that.
And maybe a little bit of Batman. I mean, it's this idea of I know that a lot of superheroes, their parents are dead. It's kind of a thing. It's kind of almost like a cliche. But and I know in the other Superman movies, and they were we're gonna explain this by multiverse. So in the other universe, it was the uncle that died, and in this one, it's the aunt, right? And they're all just different versions of Spider-Man and Peter Parker.
Exactly.
Which is okay, fine. They found a workaround to make it sort of make sense now that that all the different that the universe is unified, the Marvel sort of. I mean, Spider-Man still lives in Sony land, but they have a deal, right? Right. Exactly. Sony still owns Spider-Man, right? But they have a deal where they're we'll loan you Iron Man if you can loan us Spider-Man. They did that, right? Which was cool, which was a lot of the fans were happy with, but they had to make it make sense, and they did. But did they have to? Did they have to kill these, kill the character off? I mean, I don't know what the plan is. What is the plan for Spider-Man, right?
Right.
But
you're right. It's they'll do that. They have to make something, or they'll work you up to where you think things are going to work out in a film. And, maybe not the nice little bow on top, but they're going to work out where the bad guys get their due and the good guys, at least survive or whatever. And it's almost like they feel oh, we're so much more creative and cool if we just let it end badly.
Right. We
take you right up to the end.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what?
Well, everyone wants to make Empire Strikes Back. We're going to end on a bad note, right? And I'm like, well, sure. And because, we're just being subversive, and that's difficult, or that's difficult for the audience, and it makes them work for or we're going to make you like a character. We're going to get you invested in a character and kill them off, right? That's the George Martin thing, right? We're going to kill them every time you like a character. Oh, they're dying next episode, right? And it's enough, right? Stop. I kind of remember when I was watching Game of Thrones, and I waited till it was done before I watched it. I didn't want to watch it with the rest of society. I didn't want to deal with the hype. So I waited, and I watched it, and I was like, this is really obnoxious. And I'd read the books before I watched the series. I read the books so long ago. But anyway, and I feel since then other TV series have kind of done that, or played with that, toyed with it, or borrowed a little that kind of vibe. And it's kind of to me, it feels like they're not doing it because it makes the story stronger. They're doing it for the sake of doing it because it's cool, or it's the latest fad. It's the
making you feel pain is fun for them.
But it's a fad. It's it's a shtick, and and it may not be political in the sense of what we were talking about earlier, but again, it just feels contrived. And and obviously storytelling, there is a certain amount of intentionality when you're telling a story, right? You are tugging at heartstrings. You are kind of trying to lead your reader along, or your viewer on a little adventure, and you don't want to reveal things to them until the right moment, because you are trying to elicit an emotional response about the thing. And it's all a grand, if you look at it that way, it is all a grand manipulation of your audience. But are you doing it in service of the story, of what's inspiring about it, or are you doing it for something that isn't related to the story, right? to me, it's, if you're telling a good story, you're working in service of that story. You're working to make that story more meaningful, more impactful, more deep, more inspired, versus in service of making it sound cool, or doing the latest cool fad thing that every other TV series is doing or movie is doing, or injecting a political viewpoint or ideology, right? Like, like you can have like, I recently, a little while ago, I rewatched Daredevil, the Marvel Netflix, which, by the way, it's on Disney Plus now, but they've stripped all the Netflix. Remember, it used to be like Netflix in the credits, and it's like, no, it was never with Netflix. What? Like, they've just rewritten that a little bit, I think. But anyway, so I rewatched it, and like, Daredevil is an like, very openly Catholic superhero, right? But they don't beat you over the head with it. Do you know what I mean? Like, they don't, like, you're watching.
My sound went away.
Did it?
Hold on a second.
Can you hear me?
I can't hear. Where did it go?
Oh, can you hear me?
Sorry, I lost sound. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, okay. I can hear you perfectly.
It's like not connecting to my AirPods. Okay. Well, as long as you guys can't hear an echo, I'm all right.
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Cool. It's just like it's refusing to connect to my AirPods now.
Weird. But you can hear yourself. So
yeah. It's all good. As long as you guys don't hear an echo, that's all I care about.
And you can hear me.
Yep.
Weird. Okay. So Matt Murdock, right? Daredevil is an openly Catholic superhero. He has a religion, right? But they don't, and they use that as like for flavor, for color in the story. Like, he goes to confession, he talks to the priest. There's all this involved, but they don't, like, they're not trying to indoctrinate the audience with Catholicism. And to me, that's sort of like, or they're not trying to make it like about his struggles as a Catholic, right? It's not like a story that's going to be on like the Christian network tomorrow, right? But he just happens to be, right? Which is to me, that's kind of like the way to.
Hang on a second. Can't hear.
Can't hear at all? Oh.
I don't know if you guys can hear me, but I've lost my ability to hear.
Do you have other headphones?
Okay, this is fun.
Do you have other headphones?
This has never happened before.
Do you have headphones you can just plug in?
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
You can hear me?
Oh, yeah.
I can't hear you. Well, that's very interesting.
Do you have just normal headphones?
It was working absolutely perfectly.
Do you have normal headphones? Do you have with the wires?
I got nothing.
We've been sabotaged by the
hello?
By the powers that be here.
That is so strange.
Can you hear me at all?
Okay, let me try something else.
Yeah. See, you bring religion into it, and then God smites your channel. See, it's my fault. I started talking about Catholicism. And
no, I don't, but that's not really the problem. It's not even coming out of the computer anymore. I'll tell you what, I'm going to leave and come back. Maybe that'll do something. So you take over for a second, and I'll be right.
Welcome to The Reason We Learn. With our host is Deb. Can you hear me now? Oh, I'm the host again. Ain't this fun? The joys of computers. What's the expression to err is human, to really mess things up requires a computer.
Hello.
Can you hear me? I can hear you.
Hello.
To all our viewers, bear with us. We're having some. We should have that little thing that goes technical difficulty.
I literally can't hear. This is so bizarre. This has never happened before.
Do you have headphones?
All right, I have an idea. I'm gonna go all the way out and come back in. I don't know what else to do.
So this might just like jump us off. I am typing a message because I don't think Deb can hear me. Do you have regular headphones? Regular ones.
All right.
All right. Can you hear me? I can hear you.
Yes. Okay.
You can hear me.
This happens sometimes.
Okay.
StreamYard just shits the bed. So, all right.
That's cool though. But you can hear me all right, and I don't hear a weird echo or anything, so we're good.
No. All right, we're good. We're fine.
Right.
Sorry.
No.
So, whatever brilliant thing you just said, I've totally missed it.
No,
I can watch the replay myself.
I think I was talking about Matt Murdock in Daredevil, how he's a which is rare, like he's a explicitly openly Catholic superhero.
Yes.
He has a religion. There are other superheroes that have that, but they don't beat you over the head, and they're not indoctrinating you with Catholicism. And they're not making excuses for it or presenting apologetics for it. It just happens to be part of his life.
Exactly.
And I think that's kind of the way to do it. Like, you can set your stories in sort of cultural settings without making the story about that ideology.
Exactly.
Which, and that's, to me, that's a challenge. That's doing that in a way that's tasteful, in a way that's that preserves the characters, the authenticity of the story. Is that your characters come across as real, that they come across as genuine. And it's interesting from a filmmaking perspective, from an acting and directing perspective. Even actors, when on a film set, when they're doing multiple takes of the same scene, they'll say, "Oh, that one, that was all right." Action. They do the scene. Cut. Oh, that was my best take. That was the one. That was the magical one. And it usually isn't. It's usually the one where they're aware of what they were doing. It's a stinker. It was fake. It came off as fake. And there's no way to really describe what it is. It's just this intangible fakeness that they're faking the scene. The ones where the actors actually don't really remember what they did, right? And we call this being in your head, right? If you're an actor and you're in your head, you're thinking about the scene while you're playing the scene.
Yep, StreamYard problem again.
Oh, is it working again? Are we having an issue? Can you hear me?
Hello? All right. This is very frustrating. I think it's, God. It's literally frozen. It's like stuck.
No.
I tried to do this to kill the echo, and it's not liking me. I don't know what's going on.
Hang on.
Let's try this. It's back to the default. All right, I got to go back out again.
All right, so it looks like it's just me again for a minute here, guys.
Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I apologize for any kind of an echo.
Do you have just regular, like, cheapo headphones that just plug in?
I just don't, because I've been using these effectively now for months.
Yeah, your AirPods have never failed you, but
they've never failed me, and now they're failing me. And it's not that the battery's dead either. It's like I looked up and it's got like 90% batteries. Weird. There's no reason it to. It sounds like it's something going on with StreamYard, because you can see AirPods. It says AirPods. I do the test. I can hear the test, but then you hear it goes, and it's like,
oh, weird.
It's very weird. It just doesn't seem to doesn't want to work. But
maybe your neighbor is in the next, like, your neighbor is like trying to operate their AirPods, and they're like, why do I keep hearing?
Wonder. It could be something simple like that. So guys, if there's a little bit of an echo, I apologize. We're almost done anyway, so you can deal with that. But as far as storytelling and everything, I still feel like I'm seeing some cracks. And then the last thing I want to touch on, and I'll tell the audience that David has not seen the most recent series,
Stranger Things,
season rather, of Stranger Things.
Talked about that, yeah.
But we were going to talk about what you have seen. We're going to talk about it so far, just from the standpoint that I think Stranger Things is one of the shows where we're seeing some cracks. We're seeing some writers grappling with some of the things that we're dealing with in our society by going back in time. Like, in other words, by going back and showing us, the 80s and childhood And, you know, I know a lot of people say, this is totally unrealistic. Parents would never let you go in the basement. I'm like, what are you talking about? My parents had no idea where I was. Like 85, 90% of the time, there were days would go by, we wouldn't see each other. It was just like ships passing in the night. And it wasn't that far-fetched. There were a lot of us who were like on our bikes constantly. We'd go off to school, we'd come home, and I mean, you might see your parents at a meal, you might not.
Yep.
That was actually very realistic.
You were all over the neighborhood and all over the city, like just like out in the forest, like doing crazy things, going to crazy places.
Yep.
And the parents were like, be home by dinner.
Yeah. Right. And I mean, if that, that, half the time I had a key. Yeah. It might be like my dad might call from work, 9 at night, just being like, all right, good, you're home. I'm going to still be here until 10 or 11.
Yeah.
Be in bed when I get home. Don't be up watching television. I mean, it might be something like that. Yeah. But latchkey kids, that's what it was called. So
yeah,
for there's the part of Stranger Things that I think resonates for Gen X specifically, because that really does bring us back. There's the nostalgia component.
Right.
And even those of us who didn't have exactly a Hawkins experience, there's enough of it, the music, the arcade games, the roller rink, all that. But what I'm also noticing is the way they're dealing with the supernatural forces and what the supernatural is doing versus what's happening in the real world, what the message is of the underneath, what is it, and versus, Hawkins and so forth. And, because I don't want to give anything away of season 4, but I still saw it before season 4, where I started to feel like, what are we seeing here? We're seeing teenagers who are, awkward, but not debilitatingly so.
Right.
They just kind of make the most of their awkwardness. They're pretty open about it without any kind of, how do I put this? They don't seem to have a pathology about their awkwardness. There's not, it's kind of like, I have this going on and you need to be nice to me.
They're not medicalizing their
they're not, there's just something about, each one of them. I mean, even Elle, who's completely messed up, they're trying to normalize her as much as possible. And you don't get the sense that the writers are going, no, be kind and treat her with kid gloves and all this. They're like, no, let's make her normal. Like, let's take this obviously very bizarre person and, put her in a dress and a wig and whatever. But there's just something about, and then you've got Max is very tomboyish and you've got, different kinds of people. Each one of them has their own stuff. There's nobody, even Steve has his issues. They all have their issues.
Sure.
There's no character in the whole show who's got an easy time of it. There's always some underlying thing. And I guess what I take from it, whether they intended it or not, whether they wrote it in there intentionally or not, is you don't know what's going on with another person just by looking at them on the outside.
Right.
You can't judge a book by its cover. Don't make such big assumptions. People can surprise you. I mean, look at Steve. We think he's dumb hair kid, like always a hair boy, but then we realize like he's actually pretty resourceful, So I'm looking at this thing. The only people who would write a story like this are people who either are kind of oblivious to the narrative right now and don't want to have any part of it, which in and of itself is kind of good. They just want to tell a story, like from their own childhood.
Yeah.
Or they're making sure they tell the story true to Gen X childhood as a contrast. And then I wonder how many of us are picking up on it. Is only us? Is it only our generation? Are there any people, who are in a later generation who are noticing that and being like, how come they're not super self-conscious about, like, for example, that Dusty doesn't have his teeth and, all that kind of stuff going to his collarbones. And he's like, hey, look, check it out or whatever. Why isn't this a big deal? Why aren't the teachers like, don't you do this? Right. Well, so to me, it's
refreshing.
Cool.
It's kind of refreshing.
Very refreshing.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of, to be accurate to the period, I mean, a lot of the labels now, a lot of those labels, those shortcuts, the identity labels that are used are so common now, didn't even exist then, right? Like wasn't you know, like the people talking about their disabilities or their identities or all the gender stuff, like that language didn't exist then. And like, so if someone was, you know, had a learning disability, or somebody had a disability, or some kind of disability, or somebody was that was just Steve, that was just Susan, that was who they were when you're a kid, right?
Exactly.
That's just them, and you understood them as that, and accepted them as who they were, rather than thinking of them in terms of their labels, right? In many cases, the values of that in those days were like, that stuff's private. Unless you want to share it, it's nobody's business, and no one would ask.
Right.
No one would presume to know, like, and like you said, like what we were saying, that I think we both said, that don't judge a book by its cover, wasn't really about books. It was a metaphor for people, right? And I mean, books we do judge by their covers, and the ones with the coolest covers, we buy them because they're awesome looking, you know.
Right.
But people, you can't. We don't have a dust jacket that said that. I mean, but it's almost like they do want to have us now with a name tag that says, "Hello, my name is," and here are all my various issues.
My pronouns are, and all this. They want to announce all these things. They don't want anything left up to chance, and you don't want people to get to know you slowly as who you really are. And I think that is, I mean, it's one of the reasons I like Stranger Things, is that each of these relationships kind of evolves as relationships do tend to evolve more in the real world authentically. The other thing is that I've gotten in arguments, like really heated arguments with people about, is I see it as a show that is very balanced and realistic about gender role, for lack of a better term, you know, gender roles, sex roles, and so forth, in the sense that the boys are shown to be, you know, both the good, the bad, and the, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly of being a boy, right? The girls, the good, the bad, and the ugly of being girls. There is not like, you know, the women always save the day and the boys are dumb, you know, whatever, like in so many other shows.
Right.
Or conversely, it's not like, oh my God, I'm so helpless, help me, you know, with the girls, and which would be so weird. We haven't seen that in decades. But, you know, I've gotten in arguments with people like, oh, it's like the women are coming in to make the boys look so stupid. I'm like, what are you talking about? Dustin's like a little genius. And he's, you know, I mean, he could be a little loud and annoying, but he's pretty smart in coming up with solutions. Steve ends up in many cases being the one to like save the day because he's just brave as hell. Like, and so, because he's dumb. And I'm like, no, he's not dumb. He's really brave. He's loyal. He sticks up for his friends. I mean, it's really nice to see. He takes good care of Dustin. You know, you think the pretty boy wouldn't take care of the kid who has like the, you know, facial and stuff, but they're like practically brothers. He takes them under his wing. In other words, there's so many fine human qualities embodied in some of these characters. And I think they've done a good job of showing the best and the worst of, you know, what would be traditionally a boy thing or whatever. Then you have Mike is hardly an alpha male. Okay. And yet at the same time, same thing. He's very protective of Elle. She's got superpowers, but he's like protective of her. He takes care of her. He will you know, he's not like, oh my God, save me.
Do you think maybe these different perceptions, these different interpretations of the characters in a show like Stranger Things and any other piece of content is being skewed by people's own preconceived ideas that they carry around in their heads? Like that.
Maybe.
Do you remember the expression, like I think it was like 2014 or 2013, with check your privilege?
Oh God, I hate
remember that. Yeah. I know. I mean, don't get me started on privilege, but the point of it is, maybe what people need to be checking is checking their preconceived notions, checking their prejudice. Right, because they're prejudging, their preconceived ideas. Like, for instance, like the idea, if you've been taught that everything is racism, everything will look like racism too, right? Like if you've been taught that everything is sexism, well, every interaction will look like sexism to you. If you know, and so if you've these ideas in your head that all of these whenever a male character behaves a certain way, or whenever a female character behaves a certain way, it's a trope, it's a stereotype, it's a device, it's some contrived thing, rather than it's a moment in that character's arc that they're reacting to a situation the way actually millions of other people would react identically, of different, both sexes, different genders, all different backgrounds. Many people would react that way because that's how that particular character reacted, not because they were a boy or a girl or whatever, or because they have superpowers or not or whatever, like, but just because of who they are as an individual. Let them unfold, go on the adventure, roll with it, right? Suspend your disbelief, right? Like, we know this is fiction, but we're hearing a story, and let the characters unfold as they do. And that to me is a far more enriching and enjoyable way to watch a movie, a TV show, to read a book, is to just like let them unfold and don't decide what they're about until you've finished the story. And if you want to go back and think about it afterwards, then fine, go whatever, interpret all you want.
Well, and even if it's like, you know, I've heard a lot of people say like, well, that's on Netflix, so it must be this. I think what people are forgetting is like you're becoming an irony. Like, you're literally a walking irony. You know, you're in your zeal to avoid having people proselytize to you or finger wag at you in your entertainment. You are being pre-offended by entertainment you haven't even consumed yet, or you're watching the entertainment through a lens. Right? You're watching it through a lens of your paper-thin feelings that you assume are about to be trampled on because, you know, Hollywood hates me because I'm fill in the blank identities. Like, I hate to break this to you. You're being the snowflake right now in your story. Like, you were the snowflake.
Or the prejudiced person, right? They're being prejudiced. Because when you do that, when you actually apply a lens to a story, or to another person, right? Like, this whole like nuanced, they talk about diversity and authenticity, and I'm like, well, you know what? Diversity and authenticity, those are big, they're complicated, they're contradictory, they're messy. No, everyone wants neat little labels, and they can slot everything in, and so that everybody's a little checkbox on what do you call it?
I get on the intersectional chart, right?
Yeah.
I get from people who don't know me or haven't watched my videos. They just see like my picture or whatever, and they'll be like, well, I thought you were a Karen, so I didn't watch your videos because of like this. Okay. And then the other people are like, well, I just naturally assumed because you said you had teaching background that you were like a left-wing liberal going to be pushing this and that.
Right.
I'm like, so I'm a right-wing Karen and I'm a left-wing teacher because I was a teacher. Like, do you hear yourselves?
Well,
like,
and
this is
lazy labels.
Now, what are you teaching your children?
Lazy
what
labels.
Are you going home and projecting onto your kids?
It's so lazy, right? It's lazy labels. It's like, it is a shortcut, but there's a point where shortcuts just become prejudice. So why not like reserve judgment until you've actually gotten to know somebody, or maybe watch the show or give it a couple episodes before you. And I mean, look, I've abandoned a few shows over the last few years, and I never used to do that because it's just so laden with politics. But I gave them
a
good chance.
See what you got. Maybe
I'm gonna sit here and let them give them a chance. Maybe it was just they front loaded some stuff, and then we'll get on with the story.
I give Bridgerton a chance. I did. I even watched it all the way through to the latest season. Whatever.
Oh well, there you go.
And honestly, I sat there and I said to myself, like, I was like, I like period costumes that have been, you know, modernized and made completely ridiculous in their bright colors, but they're beautiful. So I'm going to watch it anyway. I mean, I decided that in this world of ours, in this life of ours, where there are so few real, just genuine pleasures of just, you know, it's just fun, that I was going, like you said, I was going to suspend disbelief. I was going to not really care about some of the not so subtle messages here and there. And I was going to be like, this is just a farce. I'm going to just enjoy it. I'm going to enjoy the little gossipy story about it. It's like a little period soap opera, and just kind of let it be my guilty pleasure and watch it and not be too picky about it. And I did try with Spider-Man. I swear I tried so hard, but there's just a limit. I'm sorry. There's a limit. And, you know, like, anyone who thought that you were going to reform that dude, I can't. That's like restorative justice on steroids, and I couldn't do it.
Well, one more show that I just came out. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it yet. Have you seen the new Sandman?
No.
So
is it good?
Yeah, it's Neil Gaiman, right? Netflix. I was thinking about it the other day, and talking about like diversity and all this stuff, right? And I'm like, and what I used to call open casting, 15 years ago, it's, if you look at the show, like, it has a diverse cast. It has a bunch of different people from different backgrounds, different tonal, visual tones, whatever.
Right.
But it's kind of irrelevant. Those details are kind of irrelevant to the story. Now, I haven't read, I think maybe I had, like, was it a comic? I remember having something Sandman once upon a time, but I never got into it. I'm just gonna say, like, I don't really have any background prior to seeing this show. And it has some really interesting characters. The actors are all good, like, everybody's great, and interesting, but it's the characters that are and I feel like it's like they've and I don't feel like I was ever being beaten over the head by any kind of woke agenda or any kind of identitarian agenda, or like we're gonna make this character represent this particular group and their issues. They just were those characters, and they're all represented. Like, all the usual suspects in the culture wars, by the way, are in there. But they just happen to be there. They don't.
So it's just kind of like a cross section. It's not necessarily.
It's not what the story's about.
Like Herman's head.
It's not like the story is about, like, supernatural stuff, right?
Right. Yeah.
And just because the characters happen to come from different backgrounds is irrelevant to the story, and I think it's really well done in that regard. Now, I don't know, like, maybe the purists don't like the show, or maybe they do like the show. I don't know. I just think apparently it got pretty heavily watched.
Yeah.
And I'd be interesting. Maybe next time we chat, you can tell me what you think of it.
Yeah. Okay. So that's our deal.
Yeah.
Next time I will have watched Sandman, and you're gonna finish watching season 4.
I'll watch season 4,
and then we're gonna come back together and we're gonna talk about that. But now, we've been talking for 2 hours, so we gotta wrap up, because I know.
Well, perfect time, perfect note to wrap up there. We got our deal.
We got our deal.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping you're gonna be able to watch it relatively soon, because I'm really dying to know what you think. But I so appreciate you spending time with us, and it's been a lot of fun. I always love talking about all this entertainment stuff with people who really think about it the way, like, I tend to maybe, like, overthink this stuff a little bit, and it's rare to find other people who think about it at all, never mind as much as I do.
Well, I mean, part of doing the show is to analyze a lot of these things, so you have an excuse for maybe thinking about it a little extra.
It affects our kids. It's not just what they get in school. They're also consuming this entertainment, and their parents are consuming it, and it colors our whole world. Like I said, just like the Truman Show, it's like, that's what you think. If they watch something historical, that's what they think history is. That's what they think stuff is. So it matters. And I look at it all. So I appreciate you coming and sharing your perspective, because you've been on the inside
a little bit, here and there,
bit here and there. And of course, now I want to go check out the Borgia series and read the book, and I compare and contrast. So everybody, you can find David on Twitter. You're at David Krae with some other stuff after it, right?
No, just David Krae.
David Krae. Okay. Yeah. And you also have a website, and then his books are available on Amazon. So check it out. And thank you, everybody, for coming. Please like, share, comment, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and we'll catch you next time. Take it easy, everybody.
All right. Thanks.